In today's show, Ken Race and I are going to be discussing inheritance strategies that could help make your children richer. Whether you've already built substantial wealth or whether you're just starting out in your financial journey, in my mind, it's never too early or too late to start thinking about how you can pass on your wealth to the next generation, even if they're not born yet. Today, Ken's going to share his insights and his expertise on topics such as estate planning, trust structures, and tax implications of inheritance. We're going to discuss the pros and cons of some of these different strategies, and I know that for some people this will be really vital. It's going to be important to talk about testamentary trust, family trusts, gifting, charities, and we're going to explore how these can be tailored to your specific needs and circumstances. But I'm sure there's some people saying, really don't need to listen to this yet. It's okay, I'm still young, I'm just at the beginning of my journey. I believe whether you're a parent looking to provide for your children's future or you're just curious about some of these inheritance strategies and how they work, you should pay attention. This episode's for you. So please join us as we dive into the world of wealth creation and inheritance planning with Ken Race.
Welcome to the Michael Yardney podcast, where twice each week you will learn a number of new ideas regarding success, property investment, and money in around 30 minutes. Our show is brought to you by Metropole, who specialise in helping you grow, protect, and pass on your wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. Now, here's your host, Michael Yardney, Australia's authority in wealth creation through property, who has been voted one of Australia's top 50 most influential thought leaders.
Inheritance planning is becoming more complex as people are living longer, but also family structures are becoming more intricate, more blended families. Now, according to my guest today, Ken Race, who's Australia's leading property tax and structuring advisor and director of Metropole Wealth Advisory, Ken Race says baby boomers are estimated to bequeath, probably $3.5 trillion in cash and other assets to future generations. So taking that into consideration, it's important to consider a range of inheritance strategies to make sure that money goes to the right people. Ken's worked with countless clients to help them create wealth and build a legacy for their families. And as a baby boomer with a blended family, I guess I'm looking forward to hearing Ken's thoughts. So, hello, Ken.
Good day, Michael.
Now, Ken, a longer life expectancy means that more of us are likely to, give bequests during our lifetime. I know we live longer and maybe some baby boomers are going to eat it all up. But I think intergenerational wealth transfers become an increasingly considered way to help pay off some of the debts or meet some of the needs of beneficiaries earlier in their lives. I know you're doing that with your kids. I'm doing it with mine as well. But I think it's also important to consider potential tax implications. And boy, you also got to consider the family dynamics when creating an inheritance plan, don't you? So maybe you could share with us. I know this is an area you specialize in. A lot of our clients are looking at wealth planning, looking at estate planning, and you don't have to wait till you're old to do this, do you? In fact, you shouldn't wait till you're old to do this.
That's right. There's effectively two schools of thought. The ski principle, spend the kids' inheritance, and then we don't have to worry about all this.
Well, that's a good plan, yeah.
For a lot of us, it's wanting to help our children, and yes, when we pass away, we pass it down. But more and more people are actually wanting to see the joy in their children and grandchildren by actually bequeathing assets to them while alive. The big difference, though, is when you die, most assets go over tax-free, but if you pass assets over while you're alive, there are considerable taxes and maybe stamp duty implications that you've got to be careful of. But having said that, there are strategies that if implemented early on and in the beginning before you buy assets, you can actually move assets to your children or to other people without triggering taxes, whether they be stamp duty, capital gains tax or whatever. So it's always important to think what is the end in mind and the steps you need to put in place today.
Now, interestingly, I was recently listening to another popular podcast, and I know there's lots of different thoughts and opinions, but the thought was don't bother buying properties in structures, and a tax advisor was suggesting that it's the wrong thing to do and all it's going to do is cost you a lot of money. And in the first year or two, or when you're first starting off investing, you may think, well, that's actually not for me. I can worry about all these things till later on. But time creeps up pretty quickly, and the decisions you made before you purchased a property, so the property should be really the physical manifestation of a whole lot of decisions. The decisions you made before, often vitally critical, could cost you millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars down the track if you're not careful.
That's right. That's why we've got to keep the end in mind. And, if we're spending $500,000, on a property, let alone the bigger numbers, spending a very small fraction of 1% of that really doesn't change the dynamics. And it's peace of mind that you're getting to leave the door open to have flexible options in the future. And that's what a lot of people sort of close the door to. It's, I'll decide today based on this, and they don't think of what's happening in the future, of what they may or may not want to do.
I think flexibility is the key, because we really don't know what the future holds. We don't know what the tax system's going to be, whether they're going to get allowed negative gearing or not, whether there's going to be capital gains tax or not, whether you can transfer things to others in various ways, whether they're going to be able to use your super. So the more flexible your options, even if it comes at a slight cost, the better you stand a chance of having the results that you're looking for later in life.
That's right. And I am in business, and business is all about making a profit. But the one thing that really saddens me is fixing errors that were avoidable. And there's a very large proportion of investors who either stay with the status quo at a big cost or bite the bullet and change again at a cost. Most of the time, those errors, and I'll use the word errors, were avoidable. So you've got to talk to somebody at the beginning who understands a more holistic view of the world to actually guide you into those various decision-making areas.
So let's look at some strategies that you could use, Ken.
Yep. So we've got to be very careful. We've used the word inheritance as part of this podcast, but it's all about our estate planning. And what we've got to be very careful with is estate planning is more than just a will. It takes in many other aspects. And unfortunately in Australia, there's about 70% of people who don't even do a will. So only 30%, maybe 40%, depending on the states and the social economic areas people are in, only about 30 to 40% of people actually have a will. So if you don't have a will, you die, as they call intestate. And that means the courts will decide. And that can be very costly and time-consuming. And then people who do have a will, this is a statistic that actually blew my mind. About 3/4, 75% of wills are contested in Australia. 3 in 4 end up in a dispute. And in a lot of instances, that could have been avoidable. And that's probably that first point. Start a family discussion when you're drafting a will. Who are you going to give it to? How's it going to be divided? How do you want it spent? And actually talk to your children. And if you're part of a blended family, bring them into the equation as well. And give them reasons why you're doing certain things. And it's very important that even if you're going to leave out somebody, call it the black sheep in the family, have a reason, because there was a case many, many years ago. It was a while ago, but it's still very salient. A parent left out a child and they weren't talking to each other. Therefore the father didn't see his son and therefore left the son out of the will. And at court, the son said, but when I was young, I used to give my father enjoyment. I used to play. He used to laugh. And the judge awarded him part of the estate. Give reasons if you're going to leave somebody out, because in the absence of that, judges don't know. So ensure the family members know what you're trying to do, identify any issues and concerns, and try and work through them while you're still alive. And by engaging in this open and honest communication, it's probably possible to minimize potential conflict and actually have a smoother, can I say, rollout of your estate. Because lots of people are crying and weeping, hopefully, when you pass away, and we don't want them fighting and bickering over who got what.
I guess people put off those discussions for all sorts of reasons, don't they? But I think it's a really good way to start off that, yes, you've got to have the hard discussions now so you make it easier for your beneficiaries in the future. If you have take the easy path now, I'm surprised with that statistic of how many wills are disputed. It sounds like if you have an easy path now, you're going to make it harder for your beneficiaries down the track. So start off with open and honest communication. What's your next point, Ken?
I think, notwithstanding what we said about using different structures to buy assets, the use of trusts can be very important and a very flexible tool, especially if we're looking at the possibility of making gifts to our children prior to our death. So in a trust, you don't own the assets, the trust does, and you control the asset for the benefit of the beneficiaries who actually get the enjoyment out of what the trust holds. So if that trust owned a property, as an example, and you change control of the trust, which is a relatively easy thing to do, that does not trigger taxes. It doesn't trigger capital gains tax. It doesn't trigger stamp duty. And you change control. And there's different levels of control you can give if you sort of just want to give your children a little bit of rope versus the whole shooting match. And then you can actually escalate it over time. And if you had that property in your own personal name and you wanted to gift that, then capital gains and stamp duty, and those taxes are applied at the market rate, not I'm going to give it for free. The other thing that's important is what's going to happen the next time around. You pass an asset to one of your children, they get in a divorce, they could lose everything you've given them. So again, keep that in mind because there are different things you can do to safeguard those assets to stay in the family group, even if your child is divorced. And that takes me to a second point under this heading, is when you're doing a will, consider using a trust as part of your will. You set the terms and conditions up when you're writing your will, but it's actually not set up until after you die. And the beauty of that type of will is that it gives asset protection in case the child or whoever ever gets sued. We don't know what job they've got. It helps in family law court disputes. It gives flexibility. And you can now distribute to young children under 18 at the adult tax rate. And people say to me, but what's the big deal in that? Well, the tax rate to a child who earns income or capital gains is 66%. So if they haven't physically worked for the money, the starting point is 66% on a sliding scale down to 45%. So
now you're talking about a particular type of trust, aren't you? So it's
that's
not just
that testamentary trust, which is part of your will.
Now, personally, my mother set up a testamentary trust in the middle 90s, and I was very lucky that she lived, not her 90s, she was in her 60s then, and she actually lived to her 90s. But the facility was set up long beforehand because you don't know when things are going to suddenly happen, and so therefore she left assets to both me and my sister in separate testamentary trusts. The beauty is I can now give my grandkids money for their school fees. I can pay their school fees. I can give money across to them, and it's actually tax-free money to them, Ken. It makes a huge, huge difference.
the 18,200 tax-free threshold.
Yeah, when you have so many grandchildren, it does make a difference. And again, it's a form of estate planning. I'd rather give it with a warm hand than a cold hand later. So I'd rather invest in their education now than leave them a property down the track.
Correct. And tax has to be a consideration. I had a client a couple of years ago, fairly modest, about 400,000 in super, 400,000 apartment in Brisbane. And she left it that way to her grandchild that effectively saved $40,000 a year in tax just by that simple change in the type of will. So my client, she was able to change her will when she saw the benefits and proceeded that way. But, Michael, not everybody's got a family to distribute to. And we're seeing that. And I'm seeing that certainly more and more. So a lot of people look at charities, charitable institutions, to donate. And while that's an easy thing to do, I'll bequeath all my money to whatever charity. Can I say your name is lost in the future? So people like a legacy, even if they don't have a family. I had a client, she had no family. And what she did is she set up a scholarship fund at the university she was at to give 2 scholarships a year. So in her name, so that, that made her feel really good that her name would still continue. She actually set it up. It was an engineering faculty for young girls to get an engineering degree. So there's lots of things you can do. You can even set it up in such a way that it's set up to get tax concessions, and then you distribute the income that you've received tax-free to various charities. That sort of closes that whole area of different ways you can use charities. One of the very interesting things is that you can actually set up those charitable foundations prior to death. And you've got to get specific advice, tax advice on that, which means that you can collect money along the way from your friends, your relatives to donate to this charity, and they get a tax deduction. You can then distribute the income to charities, and then on your death, put a larger sum of money in there to actually continue that along the way. So that's a very effective way to manage large estates where you want to do more than just looking after your family. Or if you have no immediate family, what can I do where I'm not forgotten?
Well, you're leaving an impact on the world. Now, I think one of the issues some people have, I've heard others speak about this, is just being concerned, I'm leaving assets to my family, but I don't even know if they're going to be able to know what to do with the property portfolio. They're not financially literate. So I think early in the piece, one of the things you should also be doing to make sure your assets get looked after correctly is encourage a level of financial responsibility, Ken.
That's right. Education is key to this. We see a lot of large family, financially wealthy families. The first generation, use it, maybe make a little bit. The third one has forgotten its roots, forgotten where it's all come from, and tends to lose a lot of it. So I think even with, can I use it, the more modest amounts of money? And look, if you're in Sydney, and sorry to people who are not in Sydney, you've got $1 million house, a plus, depending where you live. So, if you've got a couple of kids, you could be bequeathing them $500,000, $1 million each. And it's a burden for them to say, well, what am I going to do with it? How are they going to use it to the best advantage for them plus their children? I recently helped a client. One of the clauses they put in their will was they wanted to leave money to the grandchild specifically to help them buy a property. We had to put clauses in if the person didn't want to buy a property, but it was specific to buy a property for them to live in as opposed to an investment property. So you can actually tailor your wishes the way you want. But education is the key factor. And what I found, with all the due respect in the world I have for a lot of the legal fraternity, they don't come up with these ideas. It's, you want a will? Yes, I'll give you a will. They don't look at the broader range of things. They don't ask you what type of will, what are specific gifts you want to make, why, is there any issues in the family? So we've got to educate ourselves to understand what is possible, not how to do it, and then find people who'll help us ask the right questions and then get the right answers.
Well, that's something I learned from you many, many years ago when we first started working together, that you actually have to know the right questions to ask. If you don't know the right questions to ask, you lose out. So this is an area that you would think most solicitors are familiar with. You'd think your accountant would be able to help you, but it's not. Estate planning involves legal, financial, accounting factors. So it really needs somebody with a headspace and understanding of all of those, doesn't it, Ken?
That's right. And, if we sort of plot it against a bell curve, a lot of people work in that 70% zone. It's what they can do, what they know, what they understand easily. And there's another 20 to 30% of knowledge that they don't have the expertise in. And that's normally not available, can I say, unless you're extremely wealthy and you go to those type of places. So podcasts like this, I think, help disseminate that there are questions you can ask, and you don't have to pay a lot of money to find the right person to actually help you get the right answers.
Well, that's something I'd actually dispute, Ken, because it's actually hard to find the right person. There's so much information out there. There are so many people giving opinions. And unless you know the right questions, it could sound right for you. And it doesn't mean that your accountant's no good or your solicitor's no good. They're generalists, and I know you and your team at Metropole Wealth Advisory specialise in this area. So you used to be you still are an accountant, but you don't do tax. There are things that you do specialise in and things that you don't. And so therefore, I'd be suggesting to anyone who's interested in discussing or thinking about estate planning to contact you. And I'm going to leave a note in the link in the show notes where you can get in contact with Ken and his team to talk about estate planning, because estate planning is much more than the will. Now, in previous podcast chats, we've talked about not all wills are the same anyway, but I think what you've brought up here in our chat so far today is the fact that there are a lot of areas that people don't even consider. So don't even go down the wills online type thing, or the wills. I don't know if you still can. In the old days, I used to see them in newsagents. Remember, they were in the brown paper envelope.
Little will kits,
you get
they're a little bit more expensive,
done.
but you can still get them.
Yeah. So I think this is too important. And I think the other thing is, don't wait. It is no urgency, sure, but unfortunately, one keeps hearing about people suddenly getting illnesses. There's somebody very close to us who had a severe major industrial accident. You don't know when something is suddenly going to get you. And so how long are you prepared to risk not protecting your family's financial future? So I'd be suggesting you have a chat with Ken and his team at Metropole Wealth Advisory to see what your options are, what you should do. And it's even worth having a structure review, a discussion about what structure you're going to buy a property in beforehand, because this is just one of the many considerations.
That's right, Michael. It's coming back to a lot of people, I think, benefit from a more holistic review, a more holistic look at their situation, to then determine what areas they need to have some specific advice on, and work with that same person who actually understands the minutiae, and then can actually help you bridge the gap, if you like, between you and the various professional bodies, who understands the lingo, who can talk their language, can I say, who can cut through the BS that often comes back. So that's very critical.
Well, talking about talk their language, they actually speak different languages. The accountant speaks a different language, and his job is to look after your tax, and your solicitor's job, I guess, is to protect your assets, and your financial planner or the property strategist role is to look after the money side of things. And they each have different goals, names, but that doesn't mean that they can't all work together. It just needs somebody in the middle, and that's what you and your team at Metropole Wealth Advisory do well. Now, some people listening to this are going to say, yeah, but what about my business? I've got a business or a profession. How do they take care of that?
I think that falls on two different camps. There are the family business that are just the family, and it might be run by, one of the spouses. And the second type, which a lot of people are, is they've got a third-party partner. So the latter one is it's needing to do something is even more critical. And I remember discussions where, Ken, I want you as a partner, but not necessarily your spouse. So that makes sense. So you've got to understand an exit strategy. You've got to understand then how to pass on that ownership, buyout clauses, preemptive agreements with business partners, payment terms, etc., etc., etc. The use of insurance. We've got to be very careful because some people use insurance to buy out a partner. In most cases, the receipt of an insurance premium to buy you out is fully taxable. Unlike the normal life insurance, you think you get it, it's tax-free. But in many cases, in the scenario that we've just discussed, it's fully taxable. So a lot of specific and detailed work has to be done there. And don't forget, there's now two families involved. As such, you need special consideration.
Well, I know another area you look at, Ken, is superannuation, because superannuation is something that people want to pass down to their beneficiaries if there's money in the super, but it's actually not part of your will, is it? Especially if you run a self-managed super fund. And that's why I know that you and your team at Metropole Wealth Advisory have a special superannuation review. And we've spoken about it before, that in fact you've looked at mine, which I thought was good because we had external auditors look at it, we've had our accountant look at it, and boy, over the years, you saw when I first started in the 70s, we've had the trust deed change a couple of times as it had to, but even so, it was really critical to review it, and you've protected me by actually even putting another will in place. Very complicated, this superannuation stuff.
It is, because unlike other assets, superannuation can be taxed and taxed quite heavily depending on who the money goes to. So to spouses, to children under 18, there's no tax. And you can even keep it in super subject to your contribution caps and member limit caps. But the ATO doesn't consider a child over 18 to be a tax dependent. And 25 if they're studying full-time. So if you leave superannuation money to an adult child, the tax rate is 15%. If there's life insurance involved, it's 30%. And then you've got Medicare on top. So understanding which assets to give to who in the family is also important. One of the big mistakes people make is on death, they force, can I say, the collapse of their super fund. Whether it's an industry fund or a self-managed super fund, their portion is collapsed and has to be paid out. And there's a 10% capital gains tax in super. So again, avoidable if you do it correctly and you put the right paperwork in place. Tax, unfortunately, they say there's two inevitables, death and taxes. But when they bite you both at the same time, it can be quite hard.
Very unpleasant. Now, clearly, I should have put the disclaimer at the beginning that this isn't specific advice. We don't know your circumstances. We don't know what's going on. Having said that, this is general advice to help you know some of the questions to ask your advisors. If you've got a great advisor, well done. There's a lot of great advisors out there. But if you're looking for somebody who can pull all the bits together, who understands tax, who understands asset protection, who understands superannuation, who understands property very well, I'd recommend you have a chat with Ken Race and his team at Metropole Wealth Advisory. And you can just go to metropole.com.au, and I'll leave a link in the show notes as well. But I hope, Ken, what we were helping people understand is that effective tax planning involves regular reviews. If you've already done it in the past, don't just sit there and be complacent, because family dynamics change, circumstances change, finance changes, the laws have changed. So even your old super trust deed could well need to be updated. And that's a service that I know you and your team provide as well. But I hope by just sharing with people, so thank you, Ken, a range of inheritance strategies, it's going to help them optimize the outcomes for their future generations.
Yeah, and it is, the last 30 minutes or so, we've covered a couple of different areas, complicated as they are. So maybe let me sum it up in a minute. There are different types of wills that you can set up, and they create quite different outcomes. So it's important to know that. Wills also only look after assets that you own in your personal name. So it excludes superannuation. It excludes trusts. You need other paperwork that you do at the same time. As I said earlier on, only about 30% of people do a will, and nearly 75% of wills are contested. So it's important to get the right advice and put it in properly. And don't forget that proper estate planning is other than your will. Obviously, it's the super, it's trusts, but it's enduring powers of attorney, medical directives, guardianships. There's a lot of other different documents. And most importantly, you've got to be of sound mind to write or change a will. So don't leave it too late, because sometimes in old age, dementia sets in. And
I've seen the TV shows. It allows them to contest it, doesn't it?
Yeah. And look, one of the mistakes I see a lot is, children coming to me and saying, I've got a power of attorney for my mother or father, whoever it is. And yeah, they need a different type of will. You cannot make or change a will other than the person who's actually owning those assets. So if you've got a power of attorney, you can't change the will. You've got to go to a court. So do it right and do it early.
Some good lessons there, Ken. We'll be back once a month with these regular chats anyway, but I hope this has given people something to think about. And again, I'm almost embarrassed to give another plug for you and your team, but this is so important, I'd be remiss in not doing it. If you're wondering about your financial future, if you're looking for general wealth advice, and specifically estate planning or superannuation, have a chat with Ken Race at Metropole Wealth Advisory. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you, Michael.
Now here's Michael's mindset message. Remember, a change in your thinking will lead to a change in your life.
In my mindset message today, I'd like to talk a bit about stress. Is it good? Is it bad? And how do you manage it? Because, let's be blunt, we all get stressed at times. But what's the purpose of stress? It's actually got a useful function for many people. Imagine you're part of a group of cavemen walking through the tall grass of the savannah on a hunt for your next meal. And suddenly, a member of your group catches a glimpse of a lion out of the corner of their eye. The member motions to other members of the group. In a split second, everyone in the group's on high alert, intensely focused on the movement of the lion. As if the entire group were one person, you're all cautiously moving away from the direction of the lion, never taking your eye off the lion until everyone's out of harm's way. You see, stress is an evolutionary radar system whose purpose is to enable humans to intensely focus on a single threat until the threat no longer poses any danger. It gives us laser-like focus for a short period of time. Everything in our environment other than the threat becomes background noise and becomes ignored. Of course, in the modern world, stress makes it possible for us to study for final exams, to send a man to the moon, to fight off a mugger, even to win a war. Good stress allows us to solve pressing problems, but stress comes at a cost. Stress causes our focus to become very narrowed. It limits our ability to see anything but the problem. Stress forces us to have tunnel vision. Of course, stress that sticks around too long is called chronic stress. Chronic stress damages our immune system, causes plaque to build up in our arteries. It can lead to high blood pressure, if high blood pressure and other things, and you smoke and you have other issues, could lead to stroke or heart attack. Work-related chronic stress inhibits every stressed-out employee's ability to solve the problems of the company because it prevents these employees from being able to look at the bigger picture. Remember, stress narrows your focus. It causes even more stress in many ways. So to stay healthy and solve problems in the workplace, we need to turn off stress. Problem solving, in particular, requires a relaxed mind. Only in a stress-free state are you able to solve the problems, find solutions to the problems you're going to have in your everyday life. So how do you shut down stress? How do you relax your mind? Well, my good friend Tom Corley and co-author of Rich Habits, Poor Habits recently wrote a blog about it, and he suggested the following ways to turn off the stress in your life and to relax your mind. Number one, Tom suggested you laugh more. Find something to laugh about. When you're under stress, find something funny to distract you. Humour shuts down stress and helps reset you so you return to a more emotional, balanced baseline. Tom also suggested people who are chronically stressed consider meditation. Just go into another room, go to the bathroom, devote a couple of minutes just to turn off your mind to meditate. Meditation calms down your mind, shuts down stress, and helps you return to your emotional baseline. Another way of becoming less stressed, according to Tom, and it's well known, is to exercise. Whether it's just going simply for a walk or doing something more active like a run or lifting weights. Of course, you can do yoga or do other things, but exercise is a great way of decreasing stress. And so is reading. Reading something uplifting, reading something that's going to shift your mind away from the negatives to the positive to shut down stress. So if you're feeling some stress in your life, I hope some of these ideas are useful for you. That's really the purpose of me discussing this with you. First of all, to understand that stress is normal, what it does to you, and how you can control it. Another way Tom suggested you control your stress is to watch an inspiring movie. Watching a movie that excites you, inspires you, makes you laugh, takes you away to another place. That's a good way of turning off your stress. Or listening to relaxing music. I know music calms the savage beast. Music relaxes your mind. It turns your stress down, doesn't it? Another great way, if you get stressed, is to engage in something creative activity. Paint, write, make something. Engage a creative pursuit that takes the stress off you. Now, I know what some people do when they stress, and they have a drink. Now, moderate consumption of alcohol relaxes the mind. So 1 or 2 drinks is really all you need to put stress in its place. But if you overdo it, well, that leads to a whole lot of other problems, doesn't it? And another way of relaxing and getting rid of some of your stresses is to socialise. Hang out with a friend or volunteer at a local charity or go to a party or a gathering. Socialising relaxes the mind and changes your mindset. And the last way Tom Corley suggested you can control stress is to change your environment. Move away, step away from your desk or your cubicle or your work area, or go into an environment that puts you in a good mood. This washes away your stress, well, at least for the moment. So, yes, stress is a normal part of life. It has a useful function. A little bit of stress can go a long way to helping you get rid of your problems, solve problems, do the right things, be more successful. Too much stress, though, is unhealthy, and if you are finding that you're getting stressed, why not look through that list of things, listen again to see what you can do to lower your stress levels. So, as Tom said, laugh or meditate or exercise or read, watch an inspiring movie, listen to relaxing music, do something creative, have a beer, just one, socialise or change your environment. I hope that gives you some ideas about how you can relieve the stresses in your life. Well, thanks for spending the last little while with me, and I hope you got some benefit from this show. If you did, and you know somebody else who'd also benefit, please tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. There's a share button on every podcast app. On Apple Podcasts, there's 3 little buttons down the bottom. Press it and share it, or just tell them about the Michael Yardney podcast. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you'll definitely be doing me a favour and helping me in my quest to make as many people as possible financially literate. Now, there's ways of catching up with me between these shows. Just look for Michael Yardney on social media, or why not join my private Facebook group? Go to Facebook and look for the Property Update Facebook group. And I have a way of saying thank you to you for subscribing to this podcast. Go to podcastbonus.com.au. There'll be a link in the show notes, podcastbonus.com.au, where you can get a bunch of ebooks and reports, my way of saying thank you. And when you've got time, why not listen to some of the old podcasts? There's individual lessons in each of those that I think would be helpful for you. I'll be back again real soon. In the meantime, have a great week. Make it a great week.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Michael Yardney podcast, which was brought to you by Metropole, who help their clients grow, protect, and pass on their wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you like what you heard and don't already subscribe, you'll find us on iTunes or on your favourite Android app as the Michael Yardney Podcast. Watch out for our next show, which comes to you twice a week, and you'll learn some new ideas about property investment, success and money in around 30 minutes. To get more of Michael's thoughts, go across to www.propertyupdate.com.au and sign up for his daily morning briefing, and you'll hear from not only Michael but a group of leading property success and money experts. And just a reminder that the information you heard in this show today is general educational advice and not specific investment advice, as we don't know your personal circumstances. If you're looking for specific advice, why not ask the team at Metropole to help you?